There's a man in every important meeting who barely speaks. He doesn't fight for airtime. He doesn't interrupt. He lets everyone else fill the silence with their opinions, their nerves, their desperate need to be heard. And when he finally says one quiet sentence, the entire room turns and listens. You've met this person. Maybe you've envied them. Here's what almost nobody understands. Their power doesn't come from what they say. It comes from what they refuse to say. We've been taught the exact opposite our whole lives. Speak up, explain yourself, have the perfect comeback, react fast. So we talk and we over-explain and we defend and we fill every uncomfortable gap and we quietly hand our power away every time we do it. Today, I'm going to show you the psychology of silence, why the most powerful, respected, and least manipulable people on earth are almost always the ones who say the least. We'll cover why silence rattles people on a primal level, how it wins conversations and negotiations, how it makes you nearly impossible to manipulate, and how to build the inner stillness that all of it grows from. By the end, you'll understand the single most underused tool in human influence, and you'll never fill an awkward silence the same way again. Let's get one thing straight, because this is where most people misunderstand the whole idea. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not shyness. And it is absolutely not the same thing as having nothing to say. The silence we're talking about today is chosen. It's the deliberate decision to withhold words, reactions, and explanations that you are fully capable of giving. And that choice is what radiates power. Think about the difference. A person who's quiet because they're afraid feels small, and everyone senses it. A person who's quiet because they don't feel the need to prove anything feels enormous, and everyone senses that too. Same silence on the surface, completely opposite signal underneath. That difference is what this entire video is going to teach you to create. Here's why it works on such a deep level. Human beings are wired to fill silence. An empty pause in a conversation creates genuine psychological discomfort. Our brains treat it almost like a threat, a gap that something has gone wrong. So we rush to fill it. We talk, we explain, we overshare, we make concessions we never meant to make. And the person who can simply sit inside that discomfort, calm and unbothered, holds a kind of gravity that the nervous talker never will. This is why silence shows up at the center of so many powerful human dynamics. It's in negotiation, where the first person to break the silence usually loses. It's in interrogation, where trained professionals stay quiet specifically because people can't stand the void and start talking. It's in charisma, where the most magnetic people listen far more than they speak. It's in emotional control, where the gap between what happens to you and how you respond is the whole game. And it's in protecting yourself from manipulators who literally feed on your reactions and starve without them. So we're going to walk through 4 territories of silence, and each one gives you something completely different. First, the raw power dynamics, why silence makes people nervous and hands you control. Second, how to use silence as a tool in real conversations, influence, and negotiation. Third, how silence becomes a shield that makes you almost impossible to manipulate. And fourth, the deepest one, the inner silence that everything else is built on, the kind that makes you genuinely unbothered instead of just pretending to be. But fair warning, once you understand this, you'll start noticing how much of your power you've been giving away with your own mouth. Every over-explanation, every rushed reaction, every silence you couldn't stand to leave alone. Let's start with why silence is so powerful in the first place. Try a small experiment in your head. Imagine you ask someone a pointed question, and instead of answering immediately, they just look at you calmly for 4 full seconds. No rush, no fidgeting, just steady, comfortable silence. How does that feel? Slightly unnerving, right? Now flip it. Imagine you are the one who can sit in that silence without flinching while the other person squirms. That feeling, that's power. And it runs on 3 psychological mechanisms worth understanding. The first is what we'll call the silence vacuum. Human conversation has an unwritten rhythm, a back and forth we expect like a heartbeat. When you break that rhythm with silence, you create a vacuum, and nature and the human nervous system hates a vacuum. The other person feels an almost physical pressure to fill it. And here's the crucial part. Whoever fills the vacuum reveals themselves. They talk to relieve their own discomfort. And in doing so, they overshare, they backpedal, they soften their position, they tell you things they never planned to. You didn't pull it out of them, the silence did. You just had the discipline not to rescue them from it. The second mechanism is the projection effect. When you stay silent, you become a kind of blank screen, and the other person's mind races to fill in what your silence, quote, means. And almost always, they fill it with their own insecurity. The person who feels guilty assumes your silence is judgment. The person who's bluffing assumes you've seen through them. The person who's insecure assumes you're unimpressed. You haven't said a single word, but their own mind is now working against them, interpreting your calm as something far more powerful than anything you could have actually said. A reaction gives people information. Silence gives them a mirror, and most people are afraid of what they see in it. The third mechanism is the most primal: status signaling. Watch the social hierarchy in any group and you'll notice a pattern. Low status individuals tend to talk fast, over-explain, seek reassurance, and fill silences nervously. High status individuals speak slowly, pause comfortably, and feel no urgency to prove anything. We read these signals unconsciously and instantly. When you're comfortable with silence, you're broadcasting, without a word, I am secure. I don't need your approval. I'm not afraid of this gap. And the human brain interprets that security as status, because historically, only those who felt safe and in control could afford to be still. Now here's a pattern interrupt, because I don't want you to misuse this. Silence as a power move is not about being cold, aloof, or playing games to make people uncomfortable for sport. That reads as arrogance, and it pushes people away. The goal isn't to weaponize silence against people. It's to stop leaking your power through unnecessary words. There's a massive difference between a hostile silence designed to punish and a calm, warm silence that simply isn't in a hurry. One isolates you, the other draws people in. Let me give you the most practical version of this you can use immediately: the 4-second pause. When someone asks you something important, or makes you an offer, or challenges you, don't answer instantly. Pause. Let a few seconds of silence sit there before you respond. 3 things happen at once. You signal that you're thoughtful rather than reactive. You give yourself time to actually think instead of blurting. And you create just enough of that vacuum that the other person often keeps talking and reveals more, sometimes even negotiating against themselves before you've said a word. Salespeople and negotiators know this cold. State your price, then go silent. The first one to speak usually loses. Here's a real-world version. A friend of mine was buying a car. The salesman named a number. My friend said nothing, just nodded slowly and looked at the paperwork. 5 seconds. 10. The salesman, unable to bear the silence, said, "But I could probably do a little better than that." My friend hadn't said one word. He simply didn't fill the vacuum, and it cost the dealership hundreds of dollars. That's the whole principle in miniature. The talker felt the pressure. The silent one held the power. And notice what silence is not doing here. It's not aggressive. It's not rude. It's not a trick. It's simply the refusal to relieve someone else's discomfort by giving away your position. That restraint, that ability to stay calm and quiet while everyone else scrambles to fill the air, is the foundation everything else in this video builds on. But raw power dynamics are just the surface. The real artistry of silence shows up inside actual conversations, in how it makes people trust you, open up to you, and follow you. And that's where we're going next. Here's a paradox that sounds wrong until you've lived it. The people we find most charismatic and most persuasive are usually the ones who talk the least. We assume influence comes from having the best argument, the smoothest pitch, the most words. But study the people others genuinely love being around, and you'll find they share one habit: they make you feel deeply heard. And you cannot make someone feel heard while you're busy talking. This is the first power of silence in conversation. It's the engine of real listening. Most people don't actually listen. They wait for their turn to talk. mentally loading their response while the other person is still speaking. The silent, skilled communicator does the opposite. They let the other person finish completely, then leave a small pause that says, "I'm still considering what you said," and only then respond. That pause communicates respect more powerfully than any compliment. People walk away from those conversations thinking, "I really connected with that person," when in reality, that person barely spoke. They just got out of the way and let the other person feel fully received. The second power is the strategic pause that makes your words land. Words spoken into a constant stream get lost. Words spoken after a deliberate pause carry weight. Think of how a great speaker delivers a key line. They stop, they let the silence build, and then they say the thing. The silence frames the sentence, signals this matters, and gives the listener's brain a beat to lean in. If you want something you say to be remembered, put silence around it. The pause is the picture frame, and your words are the painting. Most people hang their best ideas on a blank wall and wonder why no one noticed. The third power is silence as a question without a question. This is subtle and incredibly effective. When someone gives you a shallow or incomplete answer, you don't need to interrogate them. You just stay quiet and hold a mildly expectant expression. The silence itself asks, "And? Tell me more." Therapists and skilled interviewers use this constantly. They ask one question, then let the silence do the rest of the work. People will fill that space with depth, detail, and honesty they never would have offered if you jumped in with another question. You learn more by saying less. Every word you add gives the other person somewhere to hide. Silence gives them nowhere to go but deeper. Now let's talk about the flip side, the most important rehook of this section. Over-explaining is the silent killer of your influence, and almost everyone does it. When you justify yourself too much, you signal insecurity. When you give 3 reasons for a no, you hand the other person 3 things to argue with. When you over-explain a decision, you make it sound like you're seeking permission rather than stating a position. Confident people give short answers. "No, that doesn't work for me. Full stop. No essay. No apology tour." The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who aren't entitled to an explanation, your entire presence shifts. You go from someone asking to be understood to someone who simply is what they are. Here's the practical drill for this section. In your next few conversations, try this. After you say something important, stop. Resist the urge to add a clarifier, a softener, or "does that make sense?" Just let it stand. It will feel uncomfortable at first. That vacuum we talked about will tempt you to fill it. Don't. Watch what happens. People take you more seriously when you don't immediately undercut your own words with nervous addendums. And one counterintuitive finding to seal this. Research on persuasion consistently shows that people are more convinced by conclusions they reach themselves than by conclusions you force on them. Silence is how you let them get there. Instead of pushing your point harder, you make it once, clearly, and then you go quiet and let them sit with it. The space you leave is where they do the work of convincing themselves. The harder you push, the more they resist. The more room you leave, the more they lean in. So in conversation, silence isn't a void, it's a tool with at least 4 edges. It makes people feel heard, it makes your words land, it draws out depth, and it stops you from leaking power through over-explanation. Master those, and you'll influence people more in a quiet conversation than most people manage in a loud one. But there's a darker arena where silence becomes not just a tool of influence, but a shield, a defense that makes you almost impossible to manipulate. And if you've ever dealt with a manipulator, this next part might be the most important thing you hear today. Here's something every manipulator knows on instinct, even if they've never put it into words. Your reaction is their fuel. A manipulator, whether it's a toxic ex, a controlling boss, a guilt-tripping relative, or a full-blown narcissist, doesn't actually want your agreement. They want your reaction, your anger, your tears, your frantic defending, your desperate attempts to explain yourself, even your pleading for things to be different. Any strong emotional response tells them the same thing. The controls still work. They still have a wire running into your nervous system, and they can pull it whenever they want. So here's the counterintuitive truth that flips the entire dynamic. When you stop reacting, you cut the wire. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not by winning the argument, by going calm calm and quiet and giving them nothing to grab onto. Let's break down how this works because it's more precise than just stay quiet. First, understand the bait. Manipulators provoke. They make a cutting remark, a passive-aggressive jab, a wildly unfair accusation, something designed to yank a reaction out of you. And your instinct every time is to defend yourself, to correct the record, to make them see how unfair they're being. That instinct is the trap. The moment you engage, you've stepped onto their playing field, where they make the rules and you're always one step behind. The bait isn't meant to make a point, it's meant to make you react. So the shield is this: let the bait drop. When they say the provocative thing, you don't bite. You stay calm. You respond minimally or not at all. Okay, I hear you. I see it differently. And then silence. You don't launch the 3-paragraph defense. You don't match their energy. You let their provocation hang in the air, unreturned, like a punch thrown at someone who simply stepped aside. There's nothing for it to land on. This connects to one of the most powerful protective principles in psychology. The idea that you are never obligated to explain yourself to someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. Manipulators bank on your need to be understood. They know you'll exhaust yourself trying to make them see your side, and every attempt gives them more material to twist. The healed, protected version of you simply stops. You realize that explaining your boundaries to someone determined to violate them is like reading the rules to someone who's burning the rule book. So you stop reading. You just hold the boundary in silence. No justification, no debate. The boundary plus silence is far more powerful than the boundary plus a lengthy defense, because the defense invites negotiation and silence does not. Now here's the critical nuance, because this is where people get it wrong and hurt themselves. There's a difference between protective silence and the silent treatment as a weapon. The silent treatment, going cold to punish someone, to make them hurt, to manipulate them into chasing you, is itself a manipulation tactic, and it keeps you emotionally entangled. You're still playing the game, you've just switched seats. Protective silence is the opposite. It's not designed to punish them or provoke a reaction. It's not a performance at all. It comes from genuine detachment, from a place of, I'm simply no longer available for this. One is a hook you're casting. The other is you putting the fishing rod down entirely. The manipulator can feel the difference instantly, and the second one terrifies them because there's no thread left to pull. This is essentially what people mean by the gray rock approach, becoming as unresponsive and uninteresting to a manipulator as a plain gray rock. You give them no emotional reaction, no drama, no supply. Short, flat, neutral responses. No new information about your life to weaponize. And critically, no visible reaction when they escalate, because escalation is just them turning the dial up, looking for the reaction that used to come so easily. When it doesn't come, when their heaviest emotional artillery lands on nothing but calm silence, something shifts. They realize the wire is cut. And manipulators don't stay where there's no supply. Let me tie it back to power. Everything we covered earlier, the vacuum, the projection, the status signal, works double against a manipulator. Your silence makes them anxious. Your calm makes them project their own instability onto you. And your refusal to react signals a self-containment they cannot penetrate. You're not fighting them. You're simply becoming someone they can no longer move. But here's the thing. You cannot fake this for long. You can't perform calm while you're churning inside. Manipulators are too good at reading the leak. Real protective silence has to come from a genuine inner stillness. And that inner stillness, the deepest and most life-changing form of silence, is exactly where we're going to finish. Everything we've covered so far has been about silence on the outside, the pause, the unreturned bait, the calm in the room. But none of it holds up if there's a storm raging on the inside. You can press your lips shut, but if your heart is pounding and your mind is screaming, people feel it. The most perceptive ones, especially manipulators, feel it instantly. So the final, deepest layer is the one that makes all the others real: inner silence. There's a famous idea, often attributed to the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, that captures this perfectly. Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. That space is inner silence. And almost everything that controls your life lives or dies in that tiny gap. Most people have no gap at all. Something happens, an insult, a setback, a provocation, and the reaction fires instantly, automatically, before they've thought a single conscious thought. Stimulus, then immediate response, with nothing in between. They're not choosing their behavior, they're being driven by it. They're a button, and the world keeps pressing them. The entire goal of inner silence is to widen that gap, to create even a half second of stillness between what happens to you and how you respond to it. Because in that half second, you reclaim choice. The insult comes, and instead of the instant flare of anger, there's a beat of quiet. And in that beat, you get to decide who you want to be, rather than letting your oldest, most reactive wiring decide for you. That gap is the difference between the person who explodes and regrets it and the person who responds with calm precision that everyone in the room respects. So, how do you build it? Three practical ways. The first is the physical pause. When you feel that surge, the heat rising, the urge to react, take one slow breath before you do anything. One breath is often enough to drop you out of pure reaction and back into choice. It sounds almost too simple, but the breath is a physical lever on your nervous system. A slow exhale literally signals your body to downshift out of fight or flight. You cannot think clearly while your system is flooded. The breath buys you the clarity. The second is detaching your worth from other people's words. So much of our reactivity comes from needing external validation. When someone's opinion of you can detonate your entire mood, you've handed them the remote control to your inner world. The work here is to become so rooted in your own assessment of yourself that other people's opinions become information, not verdicts. When you genuinely don't need a manipulator or anyone to agree that you're good, capable, or right, their attempts to make you doubt it simply lose their grip. You don't need to argue with someone's low opinion of you when you're no longer shopping for their high one. The third is the observer stance. Instead of being swallowed by your emotions, practice watching them. Interesting, I'm feeling defensive right now. There's that urge to over-explain. The moment you can observe an impulse instead of obeying it, you've already created the gap. You become the scientist watching the experiment rather than the chemical reacting inside the beaker. The emotion is still there, you're not suppressing it, but it's no longer driving the car. You are. And here's the beautiful part, the thing that ties this entire video together. When you build genuine inner silence, you no longer have to perform any of the outer techniques. You don't have to remember to pause strategically. You're naturally unhurried. You don't have to force yourself not to react to the manipulator. There's genuinely nothing in you that wants to. You don't have to bite your tongue to stop over-explaining. You simply don't feel the need to justify yourself anymore. The outer silence stops being a technique and becomes a byproduct of who you've become. That's the real destination. Not a person performing calm, but a person who is calm. Not someone biting back their reactions, but someone with fewer reactions to bite back. The quiet you project becomes effortless because it's true. And that, true inner stillness radiating outward, is the most magnetic, most powerful, and most unmanipulable state a human being can occupy. You can't be controlled by a world you've stopped reacting to. And you can't be shaken by people whose approval you no longer need. So let's bring it all together, because the through line connecting every part of this is simpler than it looks. Power, in almost every human interaction, flows toward the person who is least controlled by the moment. And silence, chosen, calm, unhurried silence, is the clearest signal that you are that person. We saw it in the raw dynamics. Silence creates a vacuum others rush to fill. It becomes a mirror that reflects their own insecurity back at them, and it signals a status that no amount of talking ever could. We saw it in conversation. The people who make us feel most heard, whose words land hardest, who draw the most out of us, are the ones who've mastered the pause and refuse to leak their power through over-explaining. We saw it as a shield. When you stop reacting, you cut the wire that manipulators depend on, and you become someone they can no longer move. And we saw the foundation underneath all of it, the inner silence, the gap between stimulus and response, where you stop being a button the world presses and start becoming the one who chooses. Here's what I most want you to take with you. None of this is about becoming cold, distant, or mute. The goal was never to stop connecting with people. It's the opposite. The warmest, most magnetic people alive are usually the quiet, grounded ones, because their calm makes others feel safe and their listening makes others feel valued. This isn't about saying nothing. It's about no longer saying everything. It's about ending the constant, anxious leak of words, reactions, and explanations that quietly drains your power all day long. So start small. Pick one piece this week. Try the 4-second pause before you answer something important, or catch yourself the next time you start to over-explain a simple no and just let it stand. Or the next time someone tries to bait you, take one breath and let it drop instead of biting. Any one of these, practiced for a week, will show you how much shifts when you simply say less. Because here's the final truth. People will always tell you that you need the perfect words to be powerful. The perfect comeback, the perfect argument, the perfect explanation. They're wrong. Real power was never in the words you fire out. It was in the ones you were calm enough to keep. If this reframed even one thing for you, hit subscribe. This channel is where you learn the psychology most people never figure out. And tell me in the comments, what's one situation where you wish you'd stayed silent instead of reacting? I read every single one and I'll pin the best. Then tap the video on screen. I break down the exact phrases manipulators use to pull a reaction out of you, so you'll see the bait before it's even cast.